China is top trade partner for many South American countries. Belt and Road builds ports and 5G and infrastructure. The U.S. kind of neglected the region. So are the U.S. fighting perhaps a void it created, Owen?
No, I think the U.S. has been involved in Latin America. Obviously, the Chinese have tried to make inroads. But Ellie, again, I keep coming back to this. This is the big threat, that this incentivizes these countries, other countries who don't want this kind of heavy-handed American influence in their economies, to resist it, and to resist it by increasing their defense budgets with the help of the Chinese. Or alternatively, the Americans and the Chinese simply carve up the world, with the Monroe Doctrine taking effect in the Western Hemisphere, but on the flip side, the Chinese getting a sphere of influence in East Asia. But Ellie, that's a bad deal for the United States. East Asia, demographically and economically, is a much, much more important part of the global future than Latin America is, as important as Latin America is. So that wouldn't serve in America's interest, again, which raises the bigger picture and longer-term impact of this, and whether that serves America's longer-term geopolitical interests.
I am concerned about what is the shape of the international system that President Trump has in mind. It does feel like spheres of influence. And there's a couple of problems with spheres of influence, aside from what Owen said. One is, where does the sphere end?
Right.
There's an uncertainty about that. And that in itself becomes a point of friction. Secondly, in these spheres of influence, what happens to the people who are, in a sense, are put in a position where they have to submit to the will of whoever is the dominant or hegemon in that area? What happens when they don't? And does the U.S. have any interest in that? Does the U.S. stand for anything? We have always stood for a set of values. How does that affect our soft power when it looks like we don't?
So in this respect, if I'm following correctly, Ambassador Ross, Russia will cite this to justify its own campaign in Ukraine, for example. China will cite this to extend its sphere of influence in Taiwan. So again, where is the limit of, and not just where does the sphere of influence end, what's the limit of being proactively engaged in making an impact, Owen?
Look, can I just
please, of course.
My worry about this, my worry is that this is not stabilizing. If spheres of influence becomes the definition of how the international system is going to work, it has an inherent set of instabilities precisely because, as I was saying, spheres of influence aren't easily defined.
Yeah, in the eye of the beholder.
Those who dominate a sphere, what says that they are satisfied with the sphere that has now been established? Maybe they want to push it out more. So I think we're raising a new set of questions if this becomes the way we define our approach to the international landscape.
Maybe 4 points, Ellie, to go off the back of what Ambassador Ross said. First of all, he talks about the boundaries of spheres of influence. Look at Greenland. Is Greenland part of the Monroe Doctrine in the Western Hemisphere? Geographers would say yes, but maybe political geographers would say no, that it's part of Denmark's sphere of influence and the European Union's sphere of influence. So that explains and puts a fine point on exactly what Ambassador Ross is saying. Second, in terms of international law, what I suspect will happen is America's allies will try to ring fence this, try to go to pains to say why this case is different from others, why this is an exception, to try to contain the damage to the rules-based order. Third, as we've been saying, yes, this invites asymmetric responses or strong military buildups to resist the United States. And in terms of Taiwan, in terms of Ukraine, again, this puts the emphasis on military power. Yeah. Why would China not want to go into Taiwan? Because Taiwan has a real army, and Taiwan has real allies who would come to its defense. The same with Ukraine. Not that Putin has necessarily been deterred, but he's met his match in Ukraine. In terms of Venezuela, Venezuela is a punching bag for the U.S. Army because it wasn't able or willing to invest enough in an army that could stand up for itself. And again, that sends a certain kind of message about the kinds of incentives that the United States action is setting up.
So, Samia Gutierrez, does removing Maduro create 5 new problems, push Latin America towards China, or is it solving the problem?
Obviously, to solve the problem is very complicated, okay? But we're talking about Venezuela. I would like to make a point.
Please.
Venezuela has been in a chaos for many decades, okay? And Venezuela needs the military help of the US in order to eradicate this regime. That's very important. Now, the next steps, we have the leader of the opposition, Maria Corina Machado, that she has been working for many years for preparing herself and a group of Venezuelans in order to rescue Venezuela. But first of all, we have to eradicate this regime. So it is not all the weight on the US. It will also be being taken care by the Venezuelan opposition that hopefully it will be in the government very soon.